My name is Michael Hartford. For 23 years, I managed trust records at Cayman National Trust in Georgetown. I processed thousands of accounts for wealthy American families seeking offshore discretion. The work demanded absolute confidentiality and meticulous attention to detail. Until October 15th, 2008, I believe trust records were simply numbers on paper. The Thorne family maintained 7 trust accounts with our institution. Marguerite Thorne, widow of petroleum magnate Charles Thorne, had established these accounts throughout the 1980s. Most remained active, generating steady management fees. However, account THR 198707, the Helena Morrison Memorial Trust, had been closed since December 15th, 1987. Helena Morrison worked as the Thorne family's estate assistant for 30 years. According to our files, she died unexpectedly in November 1987. The Memorial Trust, established with $500,000, was closed following probate completion. Standard procedure. The account showed no activity for 21 years. On that October morning, I was conducting routine quarterly audits when I noticed something impossible. The Helena Morrison Memorial Trust displayed new transaction dates. October 1st, 2008. October 7th, October 13th. Each entry showed the same amount, $500,000 deposited, then immediately withdrawn. I stared at my computer screen for several minutes, convinced I was experiencing a software glitch. Closed accounts cannot generate new transactions. The system simply does not permit such activity. Yet there it was, clear as daylight. I called our IT department immediately, certain they would explain this obvious error. They found nothing wrong with the system. Jonathan Weiss Thorne family arrived at our office the following morning. A thin, precise man in his 60s, he had managed Thorne legal affairs for over 15 years. I showed him the impossible transactions, expecting relief when he explained the obvious mistake. Instead, Mr. Weiss became visibly uncomfortable. He studied the screen for several minutes, his expression growing increasingly troubled. Finally, he asked to review the original Helena Morrison file. I retrieved it from our archives, noting how his hands trembled slightly as he examined the documents. The file contained standard paperwork, trust establishment forms, beneficiary designations, closure documentation. Helena Morrison's death certificate, dated November 23rd, 1987. Cause of death listed as heart failure, MR. Weiss lingered on this document longer than seemed necessary. Mr. Hartford, he said quietly, I need you to understand something about Helena Morrison. She was not merely an employee. She knew everything about the Thorne family. Their business dealings, personal affairs, family secrets spanning 3 decades. When she died, ... Sensitivities were laid to rest with her. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The Memorial Trust was Margaret Thorne's idea. A gesture of respect, she claimed. But I suspected it served another purpose. Helena had been asking uncomfortable questions about Charles Thorne's death. Questions that made the family nervous. Mr. Weiss closed the file abruptly. These new transactions concern me deeply. Dead accounts should remain dead. Mr. Hartford, some doors are better left permanently sealed. I asked what he meant by uncomfortable questions. He left without answering. That evening I remained at the office long after my colleagues departed. The Helena Morrison file lay open on my desk. Its contents spread across the mahogany surface like pieces of an incomplete puzzle. Something about the timeline bothered me. Helena died in November 1987. Charles Thorne died in September of the same year, to deaths within 2 months. Both sudden, both leaving behind substantial financial questions. I accessed Charles Thorne's obituary through our database. Petroleum industry titan, philanthropist. Survived by wife Margaret and two children, David and Sarah, died unexpectedly while sailing near Grand Cayman. Body never recovered. The Coast Guard ruled it accidental drowning, though they found his yacht anchored peacefully in calm waters. Helena Morrison's death certificate revealed equally curious details. She collapsed at her apartment in Georgetown alone on a Tuesday evening. No previous history of heart problems. No family members present. The attending physician, Dr. Richards, noted unusual circumstances but stopped short of ordering an autopsy. I found myself wondering what uncomfortable questions Helena had been asking. What did she know about Charles Thorne's death? Why did her own death follow so conveniently soon after? At 11:30 that night, my computer screen flickered unexpectedly. When the display stabilized, the Helena Morrison Memorial Trust showed a new entry. October 22nd, 2008. The same transaction. $500,000 deposited, immediately withdrawn. I was alone in the office. The building was locked. Security cameras showed no one else on the premises. Yet somehow, impossible activity continued in an account that had been closed for 21 years. The next morning brought Margaret Thorne herself to our offices. At 74, she remained an imposing woman with steel grey hair and piercing blue eyes. She wore an elegant black suit that whispered wealth without ostentation. Her presence filled the room with an authority that money could not purchase, only inherit. Aimer. Hartford, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. I understand there have been irregularities concerning Helena Morrison's account. I explained the impossible transactions, expecting her to share my confusion. Instead, Mrs. Thorne listened with disturbing calm, as if she had anticipated this conversation for years. When I finished, she remained silent for several moments, studying her manicured hands. Helena was devoted to our family, she finally said. Perhaps too devoted. She had difficulty accepting Charles's death. You see, she convinced herself there were inconsistencies in the official account. She spent her final months pursuing these theories. Mrs. Thorne's voice carried the weight of old pain. Helena believed Charles did not die accidentally. She thought someone had arranged his death to look like drowning. She accused me, Mr. Hartford, directly. She claimed I had murdered my husband for his fortune. The accusation hung between us like smoke. Mrs. Thorne continued without changing expression. Of course, her theories were nonsense. Charles drowned because he was drinking heavily that evening. Helena simply could not accept that her beloved employer was capable of such carelessness. Her grief manifested as paranoia. She leaned forward slightly. The Memorial Trust was my way of honouring her service while ending her accusations. Some loyalties become destructive, Mr. Hartford. Mrs. Thorne departed without addressing the continuing transactions. I was left with more questions than answers, and a growing unease about the account's impossible behaviour. That afternoon, I decided to visit Helena Morrison's former apartment building in Georgetown. The Meridian Arms remained a modest but respectable complex catering to professional expatriates. The building manager, an elderly Jamaican man named Winston Clark, remembered Helena clearly. Miss Morrison lived in apartment 4C for 8 years. He told me, quiet lady, very proper. Worked for that rich American family. Always paid her rent on time. I asked about her final weeks. Winston's expression darkened. Strange time, that. Miss Morrison became ... Agitated. She stopped sleeping regular hours. I'd see her leaving at all times of night, coming back before dawn. She started talking about justice, about truth that needed telling, according to Winston. Helena had been researching something obsessively. She received frequent packages from courier services, spent hours on international phone calls, filled notebooks with what looked like financial calculations. The night she died, Winston continued, I heard arguing from her apartment around 9 o'clock. Two voices, hers and someone else's, woman's voice, refined accent. They were discussing something important, something that made Miss Morrison very upset. He paused, looking uncomfortable. About an hour later, ambulance came. Miss Morrison was gone. Heart attack, they said, but the other woman, she never came down. I was watching the lobby. No one left that building after the ambulance. Winston shrugged helplessly. Always wondered how that other woman got out. I returned to the office with Winston's account weighing heavily on my mind. A woman with a refined accent had visited Helena Morrison the night she died, yet no one saw this visitor leave. The building had only one exit through the monitored lobby. How was this possible? My computer showed another new transaction in Helena's account. October 24th, 2008. The pattern continued with mechanical precision. $500,000 deposited, immediately withdrawn. I decided to examine the original trust documents more carefully. Helena Morrison Memorial Trust had been established with unusual provisions. Standard memorial trusts typically supported charities or educational institutions. This trust contained no such designations. Its stated purpose was simply preservation of memory and pursuit of truth. The beneficiary section revealed something I had previously overlooked. If the trust were ever reactivated, all funds would transfer to any legitimate descendant of Helena Morrison, or failing such descendant, to any party capable of completing Helena Morrison's unfinished business. Unfinished business. The phrase sent a chill through me. I contacted our legal department to clarify the unusual language. Senior Counsel Patricia Morgan reviewed the documents with visible bewilderment. This is highly irregular, she admitted. Trust documents typically contain specific, measurable objectives. Unfinished business has no legal definition. It's as if someone deliberately created an impossible condition. She studied the signature page more closely. Who witnessed this document's execution? I checked the file. To witnesses Jonathan Weiss and someone named Sarah Thorne Crawford, David Thorne's sister. The family member who, according to Mrs. Thorne, lived in social exile. Sarah Thorne Crawford proved difficult to locate. Our client database showed no current address for her, unusual for someone from such a prominent family. Jonathan Weiss claimed he had not spoken with her in years. Even Mrs. Thorne seemed reluctant to discuss her daughter's whereabouts. After considerable investigation, I discovered Sarah living in a modest cottage in West Bay, far from the luxury developments favoured by Cayman's wealthy residents. The property was registered under the name Sarah Crawford, dropping the Thorne entirely. She answered the door with obvious reluctance. At 41, Sarah bore little resemblance to her commanding mother. She was thin, almost fragile, with prematurely grey hair and nervous brown eyes that avoided direct contact. "You're from the trust company," she said before I could introduce myself. About Helena's account, I explained the impossible transactions, watching her reaction carefully. Sarah listened without surprise, as if she had been expecting this conversation for years. "Helena knew things," Sarah said quietly, inviting me inside. Things about my father's death that she couldn't prove but couldn't forget. The cottage's interior reflected Sarah's exile from family wealth. Simple furniture, second-hand books, photographs of places rather than people. No images of the Thorne family anywhere. "My mother believes Helena died of grief and paranoia," Sarah continued. "But Helena was the most level-headed person I knew. If she suspected murder, she had good reasons." Sarah moved to the window, gazing toward the distant ocean. "Helena came to see me the week before she died. She said she had found something that would change everything. Helena discovered financial records." Sarah continued. still facing the window. Documents that showed my father had been receiving anonymous death threats for months before his sailing trip. Someone wanted him dead, Mr. Hartford. Someone with access to our family's private information. She turned to face me, her expression haunted. Helena found evidence that my father's yacht had been sabotaged. The Coast Guard never recovered his body because there was no accident to investigate. He was murdered, then his body was disposed of elsewhere. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she spoke, as if sharing this burden brought relief. Helena had copies of everything. Bank records showing unusual payments to unknown accounts. Correspondence between my father and someone demanding his silence about past business dealings. Marina security footage that the official investigation somehow overlooked. I asked why Helena hadn't taken this evidence to authorities. She tried, Sarah replied bitterly. But my mother has substantial influence in Grand Cayman. Generous donations to police charities, personal relationships with government officials. Helena's accusations were dismissed as grief-induced fantasies. Sarah retrieved a small wooden box from her bookshelf. Inside, I found photocopied documents bearing Helena Morrison's careful handwriting. Financial statements, correspondence, detailed timelines of Charles Thorne's final weeks. Helena gave me these the night before she died, Sarah explained. She said if anything happened to her, I should find someone trustworthy to continue her work. Sarah looked directly at me for the first time. She said the truth would find a way to surface. Even if she didn't live to see it, Helena's documents painted a disturbing picture of Charles Thorne's final months. Someone had been demanding substantial payments in exchange for silence about unspecified. Past indiscretions, payments totaling over $1 million, had been transferred to untraceable offshore accounts. Charles had confided in Helena about these demands, trusting her discretion implicitly. According to her notes, he believed the blackmailer was someone within his inner circle. Someone who knew intimate details about his business operations and personal life. The final entry in Helena's journal, dated November 20th, 1987, contained a chilling revelation. C. told me he suspects M is behind the threats. Says she's been acting strange, asking too many questions about his will. He's planning to confront her tomorrow. Charles Thorne died 2 days later. Helena's investigation had led her to suspect Margaret Thorne of orchestrating her husband's murder. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Margaret stood to inherit the entire Thorne fortune. She had opportunity and motive. Most damning of all, she had been the one pushing Charles to take that fatal sailing trip, claiming he needed time alone to think. Helena was going to expose everything, Sarah said quietly. She had arranged to meet with a journalist from the Financial Times, someone beyond my mother's influence. I studied the photocopied documents, noting Helena's meticulous organisation. Every page was numbered, dated, and cross-referenced. This was the work of someone building an airtight case. What happened to the original documents? I asked. Sarah's expression darkened. Helena's apartment was burglarized the night after she died. Nothing valuable was taken. Only her research files said Evening Eye remained at the office to process what Sarah had revealed. Helena Morrison had not died of grief or paranoia. She had discovered evidence of murder and was killed to prevent its disclosure. The Memorial Trust, I now realised, was not an honour but a mockery of Margaret Thorne's way of burying her victims' accusations. Beneath charitable gestures, but if Helena was dead, who was generating the impossible transactions? At precisely 11:30 the same time as previous nights, my computer screen flickered. The Helena Morrison Memorial Trust updated once again. October 26th, 2008. Another identical transaction. 500,000 deposited, immediately withdrawn. I stared at the screen, a terrible understanding beginning to form. The amount was not random. $500,000 exactly matched Helena's original trust balance. Someone or something was repeatedly depositing and withdrawing Helena's memorial fund, as if Helena herself was trying to reclaim what was rightfully hers. I checked our security system. The cameras showed an empty office, no unauthorized access. Yet the transaction had occurred while I watched, generated by an account that had been legally closed for 21 years. I thought about Sarah's words. The truth would find a way to surface, perhaps Helena. Morrison's unfinished business was not as finished as everyone believed. Perhaps the dead do not rest quietly when their murders go unpunished. I made a decision that would change everything. I would help Helena complete what she had started, even if she was no longer alive to guide me. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, David Thorne, Charles's son, and current CEO of Thorne Petroleum Holdings. At 45, he possessed his father's commanding presence but lacked his mother's cold calculation. David seemed genuinely troubled by news of the account irregularities. "Emer." "Hartford," he said, settling into my office chair. "My mother told me about the transactions. I'd like to understand what's happening." I explained the situation carefully, watching his reaction. Unlike his mother's unsettling calm, David displayed appropriate confusion about impossible activity in a closed account. "Helena Morrison was like family to us," he said. "She raised my sister and me after our nanny left. Her death devastated our household." I asked about his father's death, probing gently for information. David's expression grew pained. Father's death haunted Helena terribly. She couldn't accept that it was accidental. She developed theories, conspiracies that made no sense. He paused, considering his words. "Helena accused our mother of murder, M.R. Hartford. Can you imagine? 30 years of devoted service, and in the end, grief drove her to such madness, yet something in David's tone suggested doubt. He spoke like someone trying to convince himself of Helena's insanity rather than someone who truly believed it. "Did you believe Helena's accusations?" I asked directly. David was quiet for a long moment. My father and mother had been having problems. Financial disputes, disagreements about the business. Helena claimed mother had motive for murder. He met my eyes reluctantly. "I've wondered about it myself, Mr. Hartford, more than I care to admit." David revealed information that contradicted his mother's account. According to him, Charles and Margaret Thorne had been discussing divorce in the months before Charles's death. Margaret had discovered that Charles intended to restructure his will, reducing her inheritance significantly. Father wanted to establish a charitable foundation, David explained. He planned to leave the bulk of his fortune to educational and environmental causes. Mother was furious about this decision. The new will would have left Margaret comfortable but not wealthy. For someone accustomed to unlimited luxury, this represented a devastating loss of status and power. Helena knew about the divorce proceedings. David continued. Father confided in her about everything. Helena actually encouraged the divorce, believing mother had become too controlling, to focused on money rather than family. This revelation cast Helena's accusations in a different light. She had not been paranoid or grief-stricken. She had been protecting her employer's interests against a wife who stood to benefit enormously from his unexpected death. "The night father died," David said quietly, mother insisted he take the yacht out alone. She said he needed solitude to think about their marriage. But father hated sailing alone, especially at night. Helena tried to talk him out of going. David's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Helena told me later that mother had been unusually interested in father's sailing schedule that week. She kept asking about his plans, his intended routes. I asked if David had shared these suspicions with authorities. "Who would believe me?" He replied. My mother is Margaret Thorne. Helena was just the help. That afternoon, I made a decision that violated every protocol of my profession. I copied Helena's account records and took them to the Royal Cayman Islands Police. Detective Inspector Robert Chun listened to my concerns with professional skepticism but agreed to review the documentation. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Hartford," Inspector Chun said after examining the files. "You're alleging that someone is manipulating electronic records in a closed account." I explained about the impossible transactions, Sarah's evidence, David's suspicions. Inspector Chun took notes but remained doubtful. "Even if these transactions are occurring," he said, "they don't prove murder." Margaret Thorne was investigated thoroughly in 1987. No evidence of wrongdoing was found. He studied Helena's photocopied research materials with growing interest. However, these documents suggest Helena Morrison had uncovered information that wasn't available during the original investigation. Inspector Chun promised to look into the matter, though he warned against expectations of dramatic revelations. 21 years had passed. Witnesses had died or scattered. Evidence had degraded or disappeared. "But Emer, Hartford," he added as I prepared to leave, "if someone is indeed manipulating your computer systems to generate these transactions, that's a serious crime in itself. We'll investigate from that angle first." I returned to the office feeling cautiously optimistic. Perhaps Helena's truth would finally surface through official channels. At 11:30 that night, my computer updated the Helena Morrison Memorial Trust once again. October 28th, 2008. The same impossible transaction, but this time as something different. A message had appeared in the notes field. The yacht appeared in Helena's account notes like an accusation from beyond the grave. No human operator could have entered this message. The account remained closed, inaccessible through normal channels. Yet somehow, Helena Morrison was communicating through the very system that had documented her memorial. I immediately called Inspector Chun, despite the late hour. He arrived at our offices within 30 minutes, accompanied by a forensics technician specializing in computer crimes. "Show me exactly what happened," Inspector Chun requested. I demonstrated the transaction sequence, pointing out the message that had appeared impossibly in the notes field. The forensics technician examined our systems thoroughly, finding no evidence of external intrusion or internal manipulation. "The message originated from within your secure network," she reported. "But there's no record of any user access at the time it was created." Inspector Chun studied the screen with growing fascination. "Mr. Hartford, I want you to understand something about the Thorne case. Charles Thorne's yacht was never properly examined because it sank in deep water before. Recovery efforts could begin. This was new information. I asked why the yacht had sunk. Officially, it broke free of its mooring during a storm, Inspector Chun explained, but the weather was calm that night. Some of us always wondered if someone deliberately sank the yacht to hide evidence. He pointed to the message on my screen. If Helena Morrison somehow discovered what happened to that yacht, it would explain her accusations against Margaret Thorne. The forensics technician looked up from her equipment. "Inspector, we have another problem. This account is updating again." Another message appeared. "Marina records. Inspector Chun requested immediate access to our archives." Together, we located the original 1987 police files related to Charles Thorne's death. The investigation had been remarkably brief, concluded within 2 weeks of the incident. Inspector Chun read through the reports with obvious dissatisfaction. "This investigation was grossly inadequate," he muttered. "They interviewed Margaret Thorne once, accepted her account without verification, and closed the case. According to the files, Margaret Thorne had claimed she remained at home the night Charles died, reading and preparing for sleep. No one had verified this alibi. The marina security guard who normally monitored the docks had called in sick that evening, leaving the waterfront unattended. Convenient, Inspector Chun observed. The most damning detail came from the marina maintenance logs. Charles Thorne's yacht had required engine repairs 2 days before his death. Sir Mechanic, now deceased, had noted concerns about the boat's worthiness in his report. Helena Morrison had access to these marina records, I realised. She could have discovered that Charles's yacht was deliberately sabotaged. Inspector Chun nodded grimly. And if she confronted Margaret Thorne with this evidence, single quotes the computer screen flickered again. A third message appeared, November 23, November 23rd, 1987. The date of Helena Morrison's death. Inspector Chun stared at the screen with visible unease. Emer. Hartford, I'm beginning to believe Helena Morrison is trying to tell us something from beyond the grave. The rational part of me rejected this possibility, but the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Inspector Chun assigned a team to reopen the Charles Thorne investigation. The next morning brought a search warrant for Margaret Thorne's grand Cayman residence, a palatial estate overlooking 7 Mile Beach. I accompanied the police, ostensibly to verify any financial records they might discover. In reality, I wanted to see Margaret Thorne's reaction when confronted with evidence of her husband's murder. Margaret received us in her elegantly appointed library, surrounded by leather-bound books and family portraits. She displayed no surprise at our arrival, as if she had been expecting this day for 21 years. Inspector Chun, she said calmly, I trust this visit concerns more than computer glitches at M, our Hartford's institution. Inspector Chun explained about Helena's evidence. The marina records, the suspicious circumstances surrounding Charles's death. Margaret listened without apparent concern, occasionally sipping tea from delicate china. Helena Morrison was devoted to my husband, Margaret said when the inspector finished. Perhaps too devoted. Her accusations stemmed from grief and romantic fantasy. Nothing more. She stood gracefully, moving to a cabinet containing family photographs. Charles and I had our difficulties. Inspector, all marriages do. But I loved my husband deeply. Margaret selected a photograph showing herself and Charles at some social function, both smiling broadly for the camera. Helena never understood that love can encompass forgiveness. Margaret continued. Charles had his flaws: drinking, gambling, infidelity. I chose to forgive these failings. Helena could not. Inspector Chun studied the photograph carefully. Mrs. Thorne, where were you the evening your husband died? Margaret's composure finally cracked, used slightly. I was here, reading. As I told the original investigators, the search of Margaret Thorne's residence revealed something extraordinary. Helena Morrison's original research files, hidden in a locked desk drawer in Margaret's private study. The files contained everything Sarah had described and more: financial records. Correspond, photographic evidence that the yacht had been deliberately sabotaged. Most damning of all was a handwritten note from Charles to Helena, dated the day before his death. Helena Margaret knows about my new will. She's threatening to destroy me financially if I proceed with the divorce. I'm going to confront her tonight about the blackmail payments. If anything happens to me, you'll know who was responsible. Inspector Chun read this note aloud while Margaret Thorne sat in stunned silence. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked her full 74 years. How did you obtain Helena Morrison's research materials? Inspector Chun demanded. Margaret's voice was barely audible. Helena came to see me the night she died. She accused me of murdering Charles, demanded I confess publicly. She threatened to expose everything. The truth was finally emerging. Margaret confirmed that she had indeed arranged her husband's death, hiring a boat mechanic to sabotage the yacht's engine. Charles had discovered her involvement in the blackmail scheme and threatened to leave her penniless. Helena would have destroyed our family, Margaret said defensively. The scandal would have ruined David and Sarah's lives. Inspector Chun arrested Margaret Thorne for the murders of both Charles Thorne and Helena Morrison. But the case was far from over. That evening I returned to the office to find the Helena Morrison Memorial Trust had updated one final time. The balance now showed $0. All funds had been transferred to an account belonging to the Helena Morrison Foundation for Justice, established that afternoon by Sarah Thorne Crawford. But most remarkably, the account's status had changed from closed to completed. Inspector Chun had called earlier to report that Margaret Thorne had provided a full confession. She had indeed murdered her husband by arranging for his yacht to be sabotaged. When Helena discovered evidence of this crime, Margaret had visited her apartment and poisoned her tea with digitalis, causing the heart failure that killed her. Margaret had spent 21 years believing she had successfully buried both her crimes and her victims. She had not anticipated Helena Morrison's posthumous determination to expose the truth. The impossible transactions, I now understood, had been Helena's way of drawing attention to her case. Somehow, from beyond death, she had accessed our computer systems to ensure her story would finally be told. Sarah Thorne Crawford visited my office the following week to thank me for my role in uncovering the truth. She appeared transformed stronger, more confident, no longer carrying the weight of family secrets. Helena always said the truth would surface, Sarah told me. She promised me that justice would find a way. I asked if she believed Helena's spirit had actually manipulated our computer systems. Sarah smiled mysteriously. Does it matter? The truth came out. Helena's work is finished. The Helena Morrison Memorial Trust never displayed another impossible transaction. The account remained permanently closed, its purpose finally fulfilled after 21 years of waiting. Margaret Thorne was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. At her age, the sentence was effectively a death warrant. She died in custody 3 months later, reportedly of natural causes, though some whispered that guilt had finally claimed her. David Thorne assumed control of the family fortune and immediately established the Helena Morrison Foundation for Justice, dedicated to investigating unsolved crimes involving wealthy families. Sarah Thorne Crawford served as the foundation's director, ensuring that Helena's commitment to truth would continue beyond the grave. The case attracted international media attention, particularly among financial journalists who praised Helena Morrison's meticulous investigation. Her story became a symbol of persistence in the face of powerful corruption. For my part, I received both commendation and criticism from colleagues in the banking industry. Some praised my decision to assist the police investigation. Others questioned whether I had violated client confidentiality by sharing account information. I never regretted my choice. Helena Morrison had trusted the banking system to preserve her memorial, never knowing that it would become the vehicle for her posthumous justice. The night before Margaret Thorne's funeral, I worked late at the office, processing year-end accounts. At 11:30 the time when Helena's impossible transactions had always occurred, my computer screen flickered briefly. For just a moment, I thought I saw a message. Thank you. But when I looked again, the screen showed only routine financial data. 6 months after Margaret Thorne's conviction, I received a letter from Jonathan Weiss. The family attorney had decided to retire, overwhelmed by guilt over his failure to investigate Helena Morrison's accusations years earlier. I knew Helena was not paranoid, he wrote. Her questions about Charles's death were legitimate, her suspicions well-founded. But Margaret Thorne was a powerful client, and I chose financial security over moral courage. Mr. Weiss revealed additional details about the Thorne family's corruption. Margaret had been systematically embezzling from Charles's business accounts for years, using her position as his wife to access confidential information about competitors. The blackmail scheme had been her attempt to secure additional funds while eliminating Charles's oversight. Helena discovered all of this, Mr. Weiss explained. She had been building a comprehensive case against Margaret, not just for murder, but for extensive financial fraud. If Helena had lived, Margaret would have faced decades in prison. The letter also contained a check for $50,000 MR, Weiss's donation to the Helena Morrison Foundation. Helena deserves a proper memorial, he wrote, one that honours her courage rather than mocking her death. I forwarded the letter to Sarah Thorne Crawford, who used MR, Weiss's donation, to establish a scholarship fund for forensic accounting students. Helena Morrison's name would be associated with the pursuit of financial justice for generations to come. The irony was profound. Margaret Thorne's attempt to silence Helena Morrison had ultimately given Helena the loudest possible voice. Truth, it seemed, was indeed more persistent than murder. The Helena Morrison case changed how our institution handles memorial trusts. We now require detailed documentation of beneficial purposes and regular review of dormant accounts. What happened to Helena's Trust Impossible transactions in a closed account should never occur. Again, under normal circumstances, yet I cannot forget the supernatural elements of this case. Rational explanation suggests that someone with extraordinary computer skills had hacked our systems to generate those transactions. But no evidence of such intrusion ever surfaced, despite thorough investigation by cybercrime specialists. The messages that appeared in Helena's account, the yacht, Marina Records, November 23, had guided our investigation with uncanny precision. Each clue had led us closer to the truth Margaret Thorne had spent 21 years concealing. Most unsettling of all was the timing. The impossible transactions began occurring exactly 21 years after Helena's death, as if some cosmic statute of limitations had expired, allowing her to finally seek justice. I shared these observations with Inspector Chun during our final interview about the case. He listened thoughtfully, neither dismissing nor confirming my supernatural theories. Mr. Hartford, he said, finally, I've investigated many crimes involving wealthy families. The rich believe their money can buy anything: silence, loyalty, even justice. But sometimes the dead refuse to stay buried. He studied the case file spread across his desk. Helena Morrison was murdered to prevent the truth from surfacing. Perhaps death simply gave her a better platform from which to expose that truth. Inspector Chun closed the files with finality. Justice delayed is not always justice denied. 1 year after Margaret Thorne's conviction, I was promoted to Senior Vice President of Trust Services. My role in exposing the Thorne murders had enhanced my reputation within the financial community, despite some lingering concerns about my methods. The Helena Morrison Foundation had grown into a significant force for investigating financial crimes. Sarah Thorne Crawford had proven remarkably effective at attracting donations from wealthy families seeking to demonstrate their commitment to transparency and justice. David Thorne had emerged as one of the Foundation's most generous supporters, contributing over $10 million to fund investigations of suspicious deaths among ultra-wealthy families. His transformation from skeptical heir to passionate reformer reflected the profound impact of his mother's crimes. Helena showed us that wealth without conscience becomes a weapon, David told me during a Foundation fundraising dinner. My family had forgotten that money carries moral responsibilities. The dinner was held at the Ritz-Carlton Grand Cayman, in a ballroom overlooking the same waters where Charles Thorne had supposedly drowned. The symbolism was intentional justice reclaiming the spaces where injustice had once flourished. During the evening's programme, Sarah presented the Helena Morrison Award for Financial Courage to a forensic accountant who had exposed corruption in a major investment firm. The recipient's speech emphasized Helena's legacy. She proved that the dead can speak if the living are willing to listen. As the evening concluded, I found myself standing on the hotel's terrace, gazing toward the marina where Charles Thorne's yacht had once been moored. The water was calm, moonlight creating silver pathways across the gentle waves. 2 years later, I published a book about the Helena Morrison case. The Silent Trust, a true story of murder, money, and posthumous justice, became an unexpected bestseller, attracting readers fascinated by the intersection of wealth, crime, and supernatural intervention. The book's publication prompted several similar cases to surface. Families across the Caribbean contacted the Helena Morrison Foundation, requesting investigations of suspicious deaths that had been inadequately examined by local authorities influenced by the victim's wealth. Each case followed a similar pattern: wealthy family members dying under convenient circumstances, investigations curtailed by financial influence, and victims' advocates silenced through intimidation or worse. The Foundation's success in exposing these crimes established a new paradigm for pursuing justice among the ultra-rich. I donated all proceeds from the book to the Foundation, ensuring that Helena's story would continue generating resources for future investigations. The irony was Delicious Margaret Thorne's attempt to profit from murder had ultimately funded the exposure of similar crimes. During a book signing in Miami, an elderly woman approached me with a familiar story. Her son, a wealthy real estate developer, had died suspiciously 5 years earlier. The official investigation had been perfunctory. The case quickly closed despite obvious inconsistencies. "Mrs. Morrison never met my son," the woman said, "but I feel her spirit guiding my search for truth." I gave her the Foundation's contact information, knowing that Helena Morrison's influence continued expanding far beyond her original case. Justice, once awakened, proved remarkably difficult to put back to sleep. 5 years have passed since those impossible transactions first appeared in Helena Morrison's Memorial Trust. I still work at Cayman National Trust, though my perspective on memorial accounts has fundamentally changed. Each dormant trust now represents not just financial assets, but human stories that deserve preservation and respect. The Helena Morrison Foundation has investigated 43 cases of suspicious deaths among wealthy families, achieving convictions in 31. Sarah Thorne Crawford has become an internationally recognized advocate for financial justice. Her transformation from exile to leader inspiring similar foundations worldwide. Margaret Thorne's crimes are now studied in law schools as examples of how wealth can corrupt both perpetrators and investigators. The case has influenced legislation requiring independent oversight of police, investigations involving ultra-wealthy suspects, yet questions remain. How did Helena Morrison communicate through our computer systems after her death? What force enabled her to manipulate electronic records from beyond the grave? These mysteries will likely never be solved, but they no longer trouble me. I have come to believe that justice operates according to its own mysterious logic, finding expression through whatever means necessary. Helena Morrison's determination to expose the truth proved stronger than death itself. The Helena Morrison Memorial Trust remains permanently closed, its balance at zero, its purpose fulfilled. But Helena's true memorial lives on in the foundation that bears her name and the countless victims, whose stories continue surfacing because she refused to remain silent. Some trusts preserve money, others preserve memory. The most powerful preserve justice itself, ensuring that neither wealth nor death can permanently bury the truth.